संहारयति सततं संहारयत्यञ्जसा सृष्ट्वा दिव्यमहौषधीश्च विविधान् दूरीकरोत्यामयान् बिभ्राणो जलनाचकास्ति भुवने पीयूषपूर्णं घटं तं धन्वन्तरिरूपमीशममलं वन्दामहे श्रेयसे वन्दामहे श्रेयसे वन्दामहे श्रेयसे ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue our review sessions on Ayurvedic fundamental principles. Today we'll be talking about Agni, or the digestive fire. This is a very important concept and somewhat unique to the Ayurvedic principles, because here we look at the breakdown, the digestion, the absorption, metabolism, and conversion of nutrients into actual energy for different cellular structures, but in the process of the fire element and its importance in these carrying out that normal functioning. This is also really important when it comes to intervention and the treatment aspect in Ayurveda. In fact, Charaka Samhita, Charaka Acharya says that half of treatment or chikitsa is by just maintaining the Agni alone. If you're able to bring back or initiate that Agni or that digestive fire to a normal state, then only your treatment can be successful. Because our intervention methods, or whatever we do, we always go back to, again, ahara, which is food, or vihara, which is activities. And also, everything that we put in is through the oral cavity, or through the GIT. We ingest that. And so in order for something to have its maximum effect after ingesting, it needs to be broken down. Then only we can have the desired effect. And that breaking down process is majorly carried out by the Agni. So that's why the concept of Agni is so important and so essential to Ayurveda and to Ayurvedic treatment. So today we'll be talking about what are the functions of Agni. In general, Agni, externally as well as in the human body, Agni is responsible for varna, or for producing complexion in a person, also for maintaining a person's strength, or bala. It's responsible for swastha, or for maintenance of health. Utsaha, or enthusiasm. You ever notice that if you feel enthusiastic or very connected to something, that you feel elated, you feel that sense of joy? How do we ever describe joy, or do we visualize joy? It's usually visualized as sort of a glowing energy. And that glowing, or that heat, or that sort of aura that expands is nothing but the representation of the Agni. Agni internally in the physical body, Agni in the mind or in the subtle body, and also Agni, the relation of Agni in the external world and in our environment. The next function of Agni is plumpness. It helps to produce plumpness, or produce the transference of nutrients into the body. It provides glow, or prabha. It gives essence, or ojas, of the body, only because of the proper Agni breakdown and process of nourishment of the dhatus can we get the essence of that process, known as the ojas. It's responsible for maintaining the heat in the body and also for energy. It's responsible for metabolism and the production of enzymes, and also for prana. Relation of prana, or maintenance of prana in the body, also can be done with the presence of Agni. If the Agni is lacking, or if it's low, then the prana also becomes very low or weak. So the The balanced state of Agni is very essential in order to have a person in a healthy state, or a variation of that Agni can result in a disease state. And with maintaining that Agni, we're able to maintain a happy, long, and healthy life. Okay? So the process of digestion, the major place where the Agni is located in the body, its major seat is in the Amashaya, or in the stomach. That's the first and foremost major location of it. There are 13 different types of Agnis. The first one is the Chaturagni, or the Agni that's located in the stomach. Then there is a Agni for each one of the dhatus. So there is those are known as the Dhatu Agni. So an Agni for Rasa Dhatu, an Agni for Rakta Dhatu, and so on and so forth. Then there is an Agni for each one of the malas as well. So the three malas, which is the Purisha, Mudra, and Swedas, there is an Agni for each one of those. So what they mean by an Agni is it helps in the process of production and also transference of nutrients and breakdown and functioning of those tissue elements as well as the waste elements. So that's why there is an Agni, or there is a metabolism that is required in each one of these processes. All of these Agnis are basically controlled by the Chaturagni, or the Agni situated in the stomach. It is sort of the king of all of the other types of Agnis. And there is also a Agni for each one of the bhutas, or the 5 elements, because that gets into the subtle stages of digestion and nutrition and transference of nourishment from what we ingest to the actual cellular tissues. So in that, the Agni, the process of digestion, the major Agni is the Chaturagni. So in the process of digestion, here we have a picture of something cooking on a campfire. And in that, it's a very good description. Actually, this description is there in Ashtanga Hridaya, which is the classical text written by Vagbhata. And here he describes that the process of digestion is very similar to what you see here in the picture, which is a pot cooking over a campfire. So in that, the vessel that you see is actually representative of the stomach, or the Amashaya, which is the vessel that holds the food that needs to be cooked. The food that's in there that's cooking is the food that you have just recently ingested, and that needs to be broken down. The liquid that is inside that pot that you add to the pot in order to help break down of the food is the Kledaka Kapha, which it helps again to provide that lubrication and also helps provide a medium for breaking down of the food. The Agni, or the fire that you see here, is the Chaturagni. The actual process of breaking down the food that occurs is the Pachaka Pitta. So here we understand that there is a great difference between Pitta and Agni. Even though Agni, the fire element, is one of the major elements in the Pitta dosha, but there is still a separate function of Agni alone, and then there are separate functions of Pitta. And I'll describe that to you in just a second. So the Pachaka Pitta is the part where there's actual breakdown or transference of the food in the pot. And the air that requires to ignite that fire is the Samana Vayu, or the Samana Vata. You ever notice that when you're trying to build a fire, you put in a spark or you light the wood, but you need to blow it in order for the fire to increase? So that air that you blow into that initially ignited substance, that air is the Samanavata. And that's really important in maintaining the intensity of the fire. So the Samanavata here, remember we talked about Vata being the initiating factor for many other functions in the body. Here the Samanavata is that which is responsible for initiation of increasing that Agni, or increasing that digestive fire. So here, when we talk about the Samanavata, or the air pushing it, when the air comes in contact with the fire, it causes it to increase. That fire raises up, and it helps for the process of the breakdown of the food. So we talked about the Samanavayu playing an important role in initiating the fire. we know that there are different types of Agnis in the manifestation of its intensity. That's where we know we have this classification as Sama Agni, Tikshna Agni, Manda Agni, or Vishama Agni. Sama Agni is that which is balanced or normal. So that means that the Samana Vayu or the Samana Vata blows at a normal rate, and it has a normal intensity of the fire at a regular spaced interval. So for instance, a person feels hungry specifically at 3 times during the day because the Samana Vayu works at that particular time. It increases the fire and it tells the person that they're hungry and that they need to eat. So that is a balanced or a Sama, balanced Agni. This is the one that is responsible for a person being healthy because it gives you the ability to digest what you consume, and then that helps for further breakdown for appropriate and proper nourishment of each and every one of the tissue elements or the dhatus. The variations that we have, the other types of Agnis, which is looking at the intensity of the Agni, we get these variations due to the variation of the Samana Vata. So for instance, if the Samana Vata is increased, or if it's too strong, it also causes the intensity of the fire to be more. So that's when you get the Tikshna Agni, or the very strong penetrating Agni. And when you have an Agni like that, the person tends to feel very hungry very quickly, and they're not getting the proper nourishment from the food that they consume, because whatever is put into this or exposed to this type of Agni breaks down very quickly, and it also starts to burn away or break down the nourishment or the nutrients in that food as well. It does not only break it down and then helps it to pass on for nourishment, but it breaks it down completely, including the nourishment that is there in the food. So what gets passed on is a slightly already digested, already absorbed, or already lack of nourishment food. It's not as nutritious as if it was a properly digested food. So for instance, if you have a potato and you put this potato in the oven and you bake it, at the proper time that it's baked, the potato has a nice structure, it's still full, there's still substance to that potato when it's baked at the proper time by the proper amount of heat, or the Sama Agni. If you leave that baked potato in for a longer period of time, or if you put that baked potato in an oven that has more amount of heat, the intensity is more, what happens is it shrinks the potato so that what you get in the end product is a very small amount of matter inside that's responsible or available for nutrition. So that's what happens with the Tikshna Agni. It's like an oven with a very, very high temperature that breaks down more of the nourishment as well as the breakdown of the food. The next one is, this Tikshna Agni is typically associated with a Pitta type of person, because their Agni tends to be more. Their Agni tends to be very high. And that's not just because of the Pitta constitution, but it's actually because the Samana Vata is increasing or initiating a stronger Agni. The next type is the Manda Agni. Manda Agni means slow. So for instance, if this Samana Vata was less, if it is not moving at the proper rate, or if it's slow, what happens is the fire is very less. So it's the same thing with the campfire. If you're building a campfire and you do not give enough air to that, the fire increases and then it just dies out on its own. It doesn't get a chance to really increase and give you enough time and enough heat that is necessary for transformation or for breakdown. So it's the same thing, like if you have an oven that doesn't have a lot of heat, the temperature is very low, then it's not able to break down the food or cook the food in the time that you have. So that's why that's known as the Manda Agni, or the slow Agni. And that tends to be more common in a Kapha constitution or a Kapha Prakriti person because, again, it's slow. It's the Samana Vata that is slow, that is not initiating a very strong fire or a very strong Jatra. The next type is the Vishama Agni. And the Vishama Agni means it's irregular. It's not always strong and it's not always slow. It's not always in a balanced state. Sometimes it's very high, sometimes it's very low. And that is also caused because of the Samana Vata being irregular. That's why this is more associated with a Vata constitution type of person. Because again, Vata is very irregular. Already the Vata in the body is irregular, so therefore the Samana Vata, the one type or subdosha of Vata, will also be irregular. Therefore, it produces an irregular Agni. Sometimes it's very strong, it blows it, and then the Agni is very, very high. Sometimes there's no Agni at all. And so therefore, their digestion is also very irregular. Sometimes the person feels very, very hungry, and then other times they don't feel hungry at all. They have absolutely no appetite. So that is typical with a Vishama Agni, or a very irregular Agni. It's also important for us to keep in mind about these different types of Agnis and its association with various body constitutions of Prakritis, because this gives us an idea as to how a person is going to respond, again, to whatever is put in, whether it be food or herbs or even certain types of activities or treatments that we would try to do. It's all, again, reflecting on that type of Agni that they have. So for instance, if someone has a Manda Agni and we ask them to take something like ghee or something such as milk, then their ability to digest that, because the qualities of the ghee and milk is something that's difficult to digest. It's more heavy to digest. So in that case, if a person already has a Manda Agni and we ask them to take in ghee or milk, it would take them a much longer time to digest that, or even so, it may even produce ama, which is undigested material, because of the fact that they have a Manda Agni. If a person has a Tikshna Agni and we ask them to take these things, then those same substances actually get digested at a much faster rate compared to someone who has a Manda Agni. That's why assessment of the person's Agni or the state of Agni is very essential to treatment and to intervention measures, because it gives us an idea as to what are the appropriate type of substances that we need to advise that person so that they get the maximum benefit. If a person is a Vata constitution, or if they have an irregular Agni, then we need to help to balance off that Agni. We need to give them things that if there is an irregularity in the initiation of Agni, then we need to help balance off the Vata movement in the body. If we regulate the Vata movement in the body, it's also going to help to regulate the Samana Vata, which initiates the Agni. So therefore, we can help to bring them back closer to a state of Sama or balanced Agni, as opposed to it being an irregular Agni. We don't necessarily always want to have an irregular Agni, because then we cannot predict or assume what the effect of our intervention is going to be. So whether it be a diet and lifestyle, or we're just giving them a specific diet for a specific period of time, if that Vishama Agni is there, some days they may get proper nourishment and proper digestion of that food, and some days it may take a very long time for it to be digested, and then it produces ama. So it's really important for us to, again, understand what is the state of Agni or the type of Agni that the person has, and try to balance it off and try to give them the appropriate type of dravyas or substances to be ingested to work with that type of Agni. Okay? Another aspect that we need to always understand and differentiate the difference between Pitta and Agni. So though Pitta dosha is made up of the fire element, but it also has a combination of the water element as well. It's a subtle balance between fire and water that helps Pitta to carry out its functions in the body. Whereas Agni, the Jatra Agni, is also present in the body and has its own functions, but is separate than the Pitta dosha. So here we see that there are specific qualities that are different from Pitta and Agni that differentiates these two. Pitta has Drava quality, which means it's liquid, Snigdha quality, which means it's unctuous, and also it's Adhogami, which means it moves downwards. Whereas Agni is Sukshma, which means it's subtle, it's Ruksha, which is dry, and it's Urdhvagami, or it moves upwards because fire actually creates more lightness and it moves upwards. So though these two are similar to each other, and Pitta does have the fire element in it, but the functions of Pitta is not only or restricted to the fire element alone. It has the water element as well, and therefore it has the qualities of the water element as well. Whereas Agni here is the fire element, or Agni alone, carrying out specific functions. So the Jatra Agni is the Agni, whereas it's different than the Pachika Pitta. Okay? So it's a good thing for us to sort of visualize or think of the Agni as, or the Jatra Agni as actual fire, and the Pachika Pitta as the enzymes that help for breaking down, or somewhat similar, loosely correlated to the type of like hydrochloric acid that's secreted in the stomach. It helps for breaking down. It also helps for metabolism, but it is different and apart from the Jatra. So as we talked about the process of Agni and digestion, metabolism, the Jatra Agni is that which is located in the Amashaya, or in the stomach. So this helps to break down the food once it's ingested, and it creates a sort of liquid form, or chyme as we know it. And that then passes on. From here it passes on and it starts to flow in these shrotases that we discussed. So it goes on and it first nourishes the rasa dhatu. So it goes through the rasa vaha shrotas, it starts to nourish the rasa dhatu. So remember earlier we mentioned about the stable doshas, the ones which is already formed, and then the newly formed dosha, the newly formed dhatu. So there's the stable, already existing rasa dhatu, which is known as the sthayi, or that which is stable. And then the asthayi, or the unstable, is that which is now newly being formed from this ahara rasa, or the liquid food that is passing on and then further being nourished to form a new rasa dhatu. So the newly formed rasa dhatu happens because of the rasa dhatu Agni. So that Agni is responsible for transforming the ahara rasa, or the liquid food, into the newly formed rasa dhatu. So that transformation process, remember we talked about what are the byproducts, what other things gets nourished and formed, and then the malas, or the waste produced in this process. That's where this is occurring. So once this newly formed rasa dhatu happens, then it then goes on to the next dhatu. And then it starts to nourish the rakta dhatu. So even in the rakta dhatu, you have the already formed or stable rakta dhatu, and then the newly formed rakta dhatu comes down from what is sent from the rasa dhatu. So then that undergoes a further transformation by the Rakta Dhatu Agni, or the Agni responsible for this transformation. So on and so forth, it trickles down and it nourishes all 7 of the dhatus. So as you can see, this is a fairly lengthy process. So it takes that much time and it requires that much nourishment to form and to nourish each and every one of these dhatus. So for instance, if we're consuming foods that has predominantly qualities to nourish mamsa. For instance, if you're eating meat, it has the similar qualities to the mamsa dhatu. So it will help in nourishing rasa, rakta, and mamsa. It can also transfer into nourishing the other lower dhatus as well. But it has a maximum effect on the mamsa dhatu because it has the same qualities of the mamsa dhatu. So in saying that, when we look at Ayurvedic cooking in Ayurvedic meals, we also want to try and balance off and make sure that our meal has enough sufficient nourishment so that when it goes through this process, it is able to provide appropriate nourishment for each and every one of the dhatus, so that it has a chance that when it goes through step by step, there is sufficient nourishment by the time we get to these dhatus as well. Okay, and after this long process, then there's the final 5 Bhuta Agnis, or the 5 Agnis related to the 5 elements. Charaka says that these Bhuta Agni is actually located in with the Jatra Agni. And in that, it helps to separate out the elements in the food that we eat. So we know that every substance, regardless of what it is, whether it's a pen or our human body or the food that we eat or other activities, whatever substance that is in existence has these 5 elements. So when we consume food, that food that has 5 elements gets separated out and digested with the Bhuta Agni, or the 5 elemental Agnis. And therefore, in the most subtle part of the digestion or nourishment process, it breaks down and it then starts to nourish the 5 elements that are in the body. So you have the food that is broken down, 5 elements get separated out, and it then goes to nourish the 5 elements that are already existing in the body, similar to the sthai and asthai. So again, this process is very important because when we look at the involvement of Agni in digestion and breaking down, if, for instance, the Agni is not strong, it's not able to digest or break down the food that we've ingested, the impairment starts all the way at this level, all the way at the first stage of digestion. So what happens is what we're taking in doesn't get a chance to be broken down completely. And that's the function of the Agni. When the Agni is low, the food is not broken down, it's not digested. Then what happens? It starts to produce a substance called ama, which is the undigested, unmetabolized, or improperly metabolized food. So for instance, in the other types of Agnis that we talked about, the variations in the presentation or the intensity of the Agni, such as the Tikshna Agni, or being extremely strong, or the Manda Agni being slow, or the irregular Agni, such as the Vishama Agni, what happens is the food, again, is not properly digested. So sometimes you may get halfly cooked, halfly metabolized food, or sometimes you get food that is completely burnt out and has absolutely no nutrition in it, or you get food that is completely undigested and stays in the same form as that which you have ingested. You ever notice that sometimes if you have a heavy meal and the food that you've consumed has a certain shape, when it passes out of your body, it still retains that same shape? That's because it hasn't had a chance to really break down. Properly broken down food does not look the same as it was when it was ingested. So that indicates that there is a formation of ama, or undigested material. This ama does not only stay in the stomach, because these dhatus need to be constantly nourished. There's a constant movement of this process. So regardless of if this material is digested or not, it has an ability to either stay here, or depending on how chronic it is, it starts to then move on. So you first, for instance, you have one meal and it's a very heavy meal, your Agni is not strong enough to digest it, it forms ama. The ama is there for one meal time. By the time it's for the next meal, you again eat more heavy food, regardless of the fact that you don't have a very good Agni, or you're not feeling hungry, but it's the time of the day you need to eat a meal, and you have more heavy food, that adds on to the ama. So the ama becomes stronger, it becomes more in quantity. And depending on how much more of this process happens, the ama starts to build. So remember, this has to pass on. Whether ama is there or it's not there, this always gets passed on. So if ama is present, the ama will then pass on to the rasadhatu. And that's when we start to see signs and symptoms of an imbalance, or an abnormally formed rasadhatu, or an abnormality in the function of the rasadhatu. Because Ama is now blocking it. Ama is now impairing the normal function of the rasa dhatu. So depending on how chronic or how much this process of ama formation continues, that determines how far the ama gets a chance to move on to the dhatus. So ama can be present in rasa dhatu, ama can then trickle on down to the rakta dhatu, it can trickle on down to the mamsa, medas, and so on and so forth. These have their separate agnis as well, but remember that all the agnis are controlled by the jataragni. So if this agni gets suppressed, all these agnis also start to become slowly suppressed. And therefore, these agnis will not be strong enough to digest this ama. The only way for us to really treat this and to bring this process back into its normal balance is by increasing this agni, the jataragni, so that it can digest this material. When you increase this agni and you get rid of this ama, it also helps in increasing the other successive agnis. And if there is ama present in any one of these stages, it then slowly starts to digest the ama there as well. So the chronicity here shows how far the ama got a chance to go, and that also determines how long it's going to take for us to then correct that. So if the ama got down to medas, then it's going to take that much time to get rid of ama here, then also increase agni here to get rid of ama in rasa, get rid of ama in rakta, get rid of ama in mamsa, and also finally get rid of ama in medas. So this is also the process of explanation why our therapies tend to take a really long time. Because depending on how many qualities have contributed to the actual pathology or the derangement from the normal process, that much time we're going to need to bring it back to its normal condition. So even though we may start an intervention or a therapy and the signs and symptoms start to disappear, but our aim is not just to get rid of those signs and symptoms. Our aim is always to bring back the body to its normal functioning, to its sama balanced avastha. That's what we always want to try to do. So even though the signs and symptoms may start to disappear when you digest this ama, we're going to keep continuing the therapy so that there will be no remnants of ama in any one of the tissues. And so once the ama is completely gone, all the processes will start to function in their normal state, and it no longer brings on any other unwanted pathologies. So now that we've gone over the basic concepts of how Agni works and its functions in the body, now we can look at further the deterioration or the variation of that Agni and how that plays an important role in pathology. It also plays an important role in supporting and giving the success of any intervention or treatment that we try to do in Ayurveda. And that we will discuss further in the live sessions. Thank you.